identified a class of networks known as scale-free networks because they exhibit, in some sense, scale invariant behavior. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So here we denote number of connections of a node by k, and here the chance of a person having k partners in the population, or equally the fraction of the population that has k partners, is proportional to k to the minus gamma. Or again, k is the number of connections that they have, and gamma is some constant. And what people found is that a surprising amount of phenomenon involving human contact patterns, and indeed involving other things like the duration of humans' contact, exhibit power law behavior, at least over for a wide variety of ranges. And for human sexual networks, for example, it's been observed that gamma is between 2 and 3.5. Now we'll talk at an intuitive level about what that means. What do those numbers of gamma mean? But here's an example. So if gamma is equal to 2, the likelihood of having 2 partners is proportional to 1/4. Of having 3 partners is proportional to 1/9, etc. It goes down as k rises, to be sure. But it doesn't go down hugely quickly. Right? It doesn't drop exponentially as k rises. This isn't, notice this is not, and I'll distinguish this very strongly, this is not gamma to the k, or something like that, or gamma to the minus k, which would be dropping, exponentially, as k rises. Instead, this is dropping as k to the minus gamma, which is dropping, but it's not terribly fast. And it has what's sometimes known as a fat tail, a heavy tail. There are people way out there, and they're small in number, but they're not infinitesimal, and they're not ignorable. Okay? So it turns out that this frequency distribution that you see, this k to the minus gamma, is what's called a power law. That's what physicists call this sort of situation where you have this gamma power associated with the k. It's gamma to the, k to the power minus gamma. And you can view at several different levels the fact that this is scale invariant. If you kind of zoom in by a certain level, you'll find the same pattern. Okay. Now, I'll give an example by this. So the impact of scaling is always identical within this sort of situation. So imagine gamma is equal to 2. Right? And this says x. I should really say k there to be consistent. I apologize. I must have put together these slides at different sides. This should really be k. Okay. So if we have some number of k, and we have p of k being the probability of a person having that many connections, or the fraction in the population, if we double k, it always divides fraction that have that many connections by 4, no matter what k is. So suppose you're dealing with someone who has 1 connection, and now you're considering the number that have 2 connections. Well, if gamma is equal to 2, we double k, 1/4 of the people, the fraction of the population that has 2 connections would be 1/4 of the fraction that has 1 connection. But the same thing is true for going from 100 to 200 connections. A huge difference, much bigger than between 1 and 2 in absolute terms. But it's still only off by that same factor of 4. Factor of 4 being dictated by doubling 2 to the minus gamma. So no matter how many connections we have, the fraction of people with this many connections is just 4 times the fraction, twice as many. Okay, so if gamma equals 3, doubling k always divides uk by 8. Okay? So again, in human sexual networks, we get this variation perhaps around 3 to 2 to 3 range. And we get this behavior. And what that means is there's some room out there in this heavy tail for people with lots and lots of connections. Now, if we plot this on a log-log plot, what we'll find is that it comes out to a straight line. And this reflects the fact that we have, again, this is x. I'm going to have to update this to be k, but bear with this. So the fraction that have x connections is proportional to c to the c times x to the, or the fraction that have it is proportional to, hence the constant c, x to the minus gamma. And so if you take the log on both sides, right, log of left, log of right, you get log of that equals c minus this minus gamma times log of x or k. And so if you choose as your axes on a log-log plot, this is your vertical axis, and this is your horizontal axis, you get a straight line. You get an equation for a straight line. Hence the straight line, the log-log plot that we saw. The heavy tail that exists, that even if you go out, you know, from 100 to 200, you still are only dividing it by 4, say, if gamma is 2. Another way to view it is if you kind of zoom in by a factor of gamma or zoom out by a factor of gamma. It kind of looks the same, a scale. If you know, increase your view in terms of number of connections, you still get the same sort of decrease. Now, these long tails matter because those individuals out there, again, are at higher risk and have a bigger disproportionate impact if they are infected. They're more likely to get the ideas and to spread them around or what have you. So in terms of influence, we have huge variability. And you know, people have observed these sort of things with different gammas for different subgroups, for example, in terms of behavior, but still fundamentally scale-free behavior. We've observed it in our own data, incidentally, on durations of people's contact patterns, interestingly. And it pops up in lots of places. Another place, for example, is in looking at internet connectivity. So it turns out that with the internet, there's a lot of sites that are just pointed to, like just a very few sites. And then there's some sites that have a massive number of things pointed to them. Google, for example, being sort of an obvious case. Now, these sort of networks we've been looking at statistically, but it turns out that you can look at them generatively as well. How do they come about? How do you build up a network like this? And in fact, the algorithm that was advanced by Barabazi and Albert in Science, I believe, Science Magazine some years ago now, described an algorithm for building this up. And it's a very, very simple algorithm. And it reflects the fact of how these sort of heterogeneities develop as well, say, in an internet context. And the basic idea is, imagine that we start with some nodes, and we seed a few nodes with a small number of connections. And then we have a chance, we're going to start adding in connections to nodes, okay? And we're going to add those connections with much higher probability, perhaps even proportional to the number of connections those nodes already have, okay? So, you know, John Sterman's textbook in Business Dynamics refers to this as the golden rule in a somewhat perverse sense. To those with the gold, the ones who have the gold make the rules. You know, to those with the gold now goes the gold. And so you think about something like a Google context or a site that's being built up. I mean, if you have just a few people that put links to your site, then you know, your site might turn up in some Google searches, but it'll be way down there, right? But if you start having more links to your site, it'll bump up, and if people start visiting it more and more and more, it'll bump further up, and then people will be more likely to find it, discover it in the first place, and put links to it, more likely to to see it when they do search. And eventually it will become a very, very prominent site. So the greater the initial visibility, it's kind of a divergence criteria. That initial little bit of extra visibility may lead to it getting noticed by new people, which leads to even greater visibility. You get this positive feedback effect, where you get some individuals or some sites getting, you know, divergently larger in terms of their impact, in terms of the number of connections they have, their prominence, etc. So it tends to favor structurally those that are already well pointed to, or well referenced, well understood, well prominent, and meanwhile others get ignored.
So can you refer to that in terms of technologists trying to use network effect?
Yes, exactly. Yes, so this is exactly some of the factors that end up getting modeled under the rubric of network effects in related topics in say, business context or system dynamics modeling, etc. You know, it's a very, very real phenomenon. The people who, you know, get the research grants can get the papers out and get more prominent, and then they can attract the graduate students, and they can, you know, have the credibility to get additional research grants, etc. And there's positive feedbacks associated with that lead to this kind of structural effects we see in these networks. Similarly, as the internet built up, you know, certain sites, if you were to replay it, it might be different sites, but certain sites, you know, built up disproportionate impact. So Yahoo early on, for example. You could imagine an alternate world internet where, you know, Yahoo was not dominant, instead Alta Vista, you know, became much larger, or what have you. So stochastics early on, and sort of where things were allocated, can make a disproportionate difference. But the point is, it's a process where those who already have connections are more likely to get more connections, compared to the situation with Poisson random networks, where each new connection added is just added with equal likelihood between any pair of individuals, regardless of location, their existing locality, and regardless, indeed, of the number of connections they already have. So here, something quite different from the tidy world of ring lattice networks, from even the modest heterogeneity you see in small world or Poisson random networks. You get massive amounts of heterogeneity. Those ones who have the gold get lots and lots of gold, and a lot of people get very, very little. Okay? Unfortunately, inequities and disparities you also see in the health side and income side. So let's go look in the model here, and let's use a scale-free network.